Welcome to Cross-Border Tax Talks, where we discuss the latest trends in international taxation, from Pillar 2 to transformation. I'm Doug McHoney, PwC's International Tax Services Global Leader. PwC's Pillar 2 engine, powered by Beacon, is a game changer for Pillar 2 modeling, provision, and compliance calculations. Built on a graph system utilizing over 20 years of international tax technology, this cloud-based centralized rules engine is developed by a team of Pillar 2 tax experts from around the globe. PwC's Pillar 2 engine is currently available as a service and is now available to license. On this week's episode of Cross-Border Tax Talks, we're at PwC's EMEA Tax Academy in Prague, Czechia, recording in front of a live studio audience. I'm excited to welcome Leo Johnson to the podcast. Leo is a lecturer at Oxford University's Smith School of Enterprise and Environment. He is the co-founder of the advisory firm Sustainable Finance, which was acquired by PwC UK, where he chairs the advisory council. His experience also includes time at the World Bank and as a presenter of the BBC series on megatrends and innovation. Leo, welcome to the podcast.
Fantastic to be here.
All right. Well, Leo, many of us feel the stress from the current news cycle, whether it's wars across the globe, economic challenges, climate change. Each of us have our own issues. And for tax professionals, we're also feeling the stress from change. This includes tariff policies, the new global tax order, including Pillar 2, supply chain disruptions from our clients. How do we deal with this?
So I'm really puzzled by this question of sludge. Okay, how come when we're confronted by the need to change, it just doesn't happen? It runs into this treacle of organizational inertia. And the research I'm doing with an Oxford team is in barriers to action. And one of the things we're discovering is this paradox, which is, there's this old theory that the way you get someone to do something is you kind of give them information. You give them information about the logic. And all the transformation theory is create the burning platform. And then people see the platform's burning, and then they'll respond. This is conventional wisdom, yes? And the reality is something pretty close to the opposite seems to happen. That when we're confronted with a transformation, someone tells you, do something different, then what we experience is this logic conflict between what we know with all the hidden commitments that we've got and what we're being asked to do. And we respond with some really skillful ways of doing absolutely diddly squat. That's the basic dynamic. And the extraordinary thing is, it looks like this is, and we're working with a load of neuroscientists as well as behavioral scientists on this. It looks as though this is part of our biology, and it actually is also really useful. Okay, so there's a beautiful study of 40 psychopaths in the Wisconsin prison system. Okay, when you may feel there are some parallels going on with the brains in this room here, but I will leave that. Okay, so if you look at these brains of the psychopaths, they got two features which are quite interesting. One is their amygdala, the sort of fight or flight bit of the brain, is overactive. They got a hell of a lot of fear stoked up there that's driving through these let's punch this person kind of impulse. The second thing they've got is a deficit in the prefrontal cortex, which is the evolved bit of the brain that evaluates threats and cools the system down and says, it's okay. So what they haven't got is the ability to look at threats and cool off. And we, in this room and listening to this podcast, are not in the prison system in Wisconsin.
Not yet.
For one reason, chiefly, confronted by these extraordinary set of external threats we've got. We're all sitting here quite complacently in a kind of post-lunch stupor, despite geopolitical threats that are unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime, despite the looming long shadow of war, despite climate crisis which appears to be reaching tipping points. We're sitting here in a state of magnificent inertia because we are using this neuroscientific mechanism of what they call motivated cognition, where we're using the prefrontal cortex just to cool ourselves down and come up with justifications for an action. And we're staying sane. It's great for us. We're all sitting here perfectly relaxed. But the problem is we're leaving unaddressed a whole series of things, locally, institutionally, in the world, where these problems ain't going away at all.
And what I want to get into, Leo, is some of those practical things that tax professionals and those within a corporate environment and the business community can deal with. But maybe before we go there, I think, as I think about all the stress that we have and that we're dealing with, and, just sometimes you just want to internalize it. And it can be very challenging, right, to deal with that stress, and we're just going about our daily lives. And one of the things that really motivates me is this concept of purpose. And I've thought a lot about this. I mean, I'm an international tax lawyer. Most of us are working for big businesses. And I learned a long time ago that what motivates me and that what gets me up in the day is the ability and the desire to make a positive difference in people's lives. Because as I work with people, as I work with teams, as I work with my bosses, as I work with my employees, I hope that they feel that I've helped make them a better person. What advice do you have? And you did an amazing TEDx talk called Hijacking the Corporate Robot that I would encourage the people in the audience and listeners to check out. But what is your view on purpose, and how can we find purpose in our daily lives and then bring those to work, right? And not the purpose of the stuff that we do outside of work and the organizations that we may work with. Like, how do we find purpose in our jobs and our daily life?
So I love that question, Doug. And actually, a tiny footnote, the title of the talk is actually, open brackets, lovingly, close brackets, hijacking the corporate robot.
I missed the brackets.
It's lovingly.
That's an important...
But why do I put in the lovingly? Because you can come in with your purpose, and if it's not someone else's purpose, you're going to run into a bit of a car crash. So look, if you in the studio audience here, if you imagine that you are all the CEO of some oil and gas company in Kazakhstan, and life is brilliant. You're on some huge salary. You got a swimming pool. You got a pizza oven. Your kids are in private school. You got a pension that's gonna be ready in 18 months. You're just like running down the clock. Everything is beautiful. And suddenly you get a call from the big boss, the global CEO, and she says, "Guess what, Mumtaz, I got a new plan. We're gonna go huge on green hydrogen." What's your reaction? Do you feel joy? Do you feel, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to do now, let's really embrace this? No. Do you say to the big boss, absolutely no way, go jump off a cliff, I'm never doing that? No. What you do is you come up with sludge, with inertia. You say, I got a great idea, yeah, that's brilliant. Let's do a conference 2 years from now on green hydrogen, we can totally nail this. You sludge it out. And if she really pushed on you, what would that effect be on you? That effect, as she tries to impose her purpose on you, will just be to create more resistance. Because the hidden conflicts that you've got will be immense. And the reality that you've got, that she's failing to acknowledge, will just create friction, create polarization, create adversarial dynamics, and nothing's going to happen. So the purpose can actually be a toxic mission. If you're going at it from a unilateral, this is my dream, and I'm going to impose it on you perspective. But at the same time, if you can get it right, if you can manage to identify the zone of potential agreement, and by the way, it's going to involve some people you really disagree with, and coming up with shared solutions, and really listening, and really humbling your own sense of what the right solution is. But if you can manage to do that, then absolutely something extraordinary happens, because you're suddenly harnessing the power of a huge load of people. And the quality of the engagement become something that's completely different. And the control structures that are involved, and the motivations, and the mechanisms by which people do stuff become completely different. And in a recent Oxford study that we've done, we found that in these teams where there are groups who are working on the projects that they care about, who we call these catalysts, compared to the people who are stuck in a job without purpose, and where they feel that gap, that purpose gap, we found that there was a 169% difference in dedication to the job between the people who felt fully engaged and the people who felt thwarted in their purpose.
And I think most of us that work for large organizations, which is most of the listeners of this podcast and those of us here today, there are many opportunities to find something that you feel passionate about, that you feel purpose about, that sort of drives you and motivates you. One of the things in your TEDx talk, you mentioned a study by Desi and Ryan, where they addressed the secret of bliss and deep contentment. And that really resonated with me of, as we think about our day-to-day lives, and I talked about our day-to-day work lives, and I think about trying to make a positive difference in people's lives. But we also want to have projects and things that we're working on. What did that study tell us about bliss and deep contentment?
Yes, this is a lovely study. So, and what they're trying to get at is what really motivates people to get out of bed and really thrive in the workplace and in the type of stuff we get up to. And it turns out that most work that you and I are involved with, it kind of is not exactly structured to deliver it. And there's a lovely study of studies by an economist called Blanchflower, who looks at 7 different studies across the world to look at the happiness curve of us all from the ages of 18 to about 80. And if you were to, in your heads, imagine that curve of aged 18 to 80, what happiness looks like. Mm-hmm. What is the shape of that curve? Is it a straight line? Is it a relentless journey upwards till you die? Is it a downward? What does that curve look like? What's your guess, Doug?
I hope that it's a straight line up, but I am a glasses half full kind of guy.
Okay, so it turns out that across all these studies, the curve basically is a massive U shape. That life is beautiful, except for the period from about 16 to 60. Otherwise, to sum it up, work sucks. Work completely sucks is the basic conclusion from that data. The people are locked in these jobs where they get in one box to move to another box, and then they sit doing this atomized, alienated function, disconnected from outcomes that appear to have meaning, with extrinsic motivations around money, where it turns out that as you vary it, very little happens to motivation. In fact, very often, and you see this in studies where people are asked to give blood, it's when you pay them that motivation actually craters and people give less blood. That very little of this taps into what really makes people happy, let alone thrive. And what Desi and Ryan studied was the conditions where people really do have that feeling that, we've all probably had it. I hope everyone in this room has had it, even at work, where you feel like the warm wind is going through your hair and you may be working, but it doesn't feel like pain. I'm seeing a couple of people nodding. We've had that, and we just about had that. And what they find is basically that the 3 factors are, first of all, agency. You believe that you can do something. You don't just have that sense of helplessness. The second then is autonomy. That what you're doing is something that matters to you. It's part of your agenda to do this, and you're involved in the design and how to do it. And then the third, which of course underlies the agency, is the connectedness, that there is a group that you are doing it with. And what is so interesting about this is that sense of bliss, I think we have this sort of almost Puritan beating ourselves up attitude that work should have nothing to do with that. That's got to have, that's completely self-indulgent to think about that as even being something that work should solve for. But if you want to be someone who does deliver something that's got meaning, that has some impact in the world, then that team structure that's capable of doing it and the bliss it delivers is really important, because you're creating this set of outcomes. You're creating the change you've made in the world, point one, through this team. Point two, you've created a unit within the organization, which is this subversive unit, which is a unit that's capable of delivering change. But the third thing you've done is you've rewired yourself, because you've given yourself a taste of something that is richer, deeper, stronger, tastes better than the corporate bonus. You've given yourself a taste of that actual moment of great fulfillment when you've collectively done something. So what you've given yourself is a hack, and the impetus, the impulse, the desire to go back and find something else to do. And the core message is, don't try to change the whole world at once, because you're just going to feel an enormous sense of futility. But find something that matters to you locally. Find a crazy, beautiful set of people within your organization with a really different set of skills who can bring some perspectives, and then harness that diversity, deliver it, and then you've built up the muscles. And maybe, just maybe, you'll become a serial changemaker who'll go and do it again somewhere.
And we're going to come back to that. But the way that list of agency, autonomy, connectedness, it feels to me like the recipe for a high-performing team, right? And I think one of the things that has been most enjoyable to me over my 26-year career is when you're on a high-performing team. Ideally, you're trying to accomplish something that you believe in, but sometimes we got to get stuff done. But being on a high-performing team gives me energy, right? Makes me enjoy my work, makes me get excited to go up today. And I have the pleasure of going through that experience and what I'm working on with respect to Pillar 2, for example, and the team that I get to work with. And I think that whatever level you are, whether you're brand new or you're one of the senior executives, making sure that people feel that they have both agency and autonomy, and thinking about how you connect and bring people together. I think all of us that have been on a team like that enjoy that. And, frankly, some of the stuff that needs to get done in our day-to-day work lives, we're not, saving lives, right? We're not in the medical profession, for example, but when we can bring that energy, when we can harness that, when we can bring the agency, autonomy, connectedness to a team, I think it makes it so much more fun to go to work and makes things that much more enjoyable.
Hugely.
So you also mentioned in your TEDx talk, Leo, and that you admitted that you had faced some challenges in your career to drive meaningful change. And maybe we'll start with how do we take advantage? We mentioned all of the geopolitical and all the news cycle, the challenge that we have as tax professionals. What advice do you have for folks of how do we, and whether you're the brand new person or the senior executive, how do we try to take advantage of this? And what advice do you have for actually trying to engage and create some of this change in our workplaces?
The first thing I think you need to do is kill some stuff. And
you're going to need to specify that.
Get rid of some of the BS that's chewing up your mind space, keeping you on the hamster wheel, stopping you from connecting with the stuff that matters to you. So I think we are all of us, we're told we're living in an attention economy. We're living in a distraction economy where our eyeballs are eaten, where we are filled with mindless tasks, and where when we're not, we numb ourselves with more distractions. So the very first thing to do, I think, is to move from this distraction mindset to this attention mindset where you are actually able to notice the world, and not just notice it, but the way I feel it is almost like you have to get bitten by something. You have to be connected enough with the world to feel something that's not just a top-down idea, but is actually grounded in reality. When I used to work at the World Bank, there was a famous development story of something called play pumps, which is a brilliant ingenious Washington, D.C.-based idea of how you could address some waterborne disease issues in southern Africa. And the idea was you'd put in place these carousels, and the kids would swing on the carousels while simultaneously pumping water for free, which would save the back-breaking task of water pumping, and there'd be advertisements on the carousels, and it would be generating money. And the reality was, the kids immediately knew they were getting pimped. They said, "We refuse to pay on your carousels." The local women then had to do back-breaking work of trying to push these carousels around.
Oh, so they're just rolling those things
absolutely.
around.
There were no spare parts. They then cost $14,000 to import, money that displaced the actual water. The increase in waterborne diseases went up because this was a top-down idea that someone else had from a desk. So you've got to get rid of stuff and find the stillness to notice a real problem, which may well involve actually doing this crazy thing of talking to people and listening to them and seeing what they're actually saying. The thing which probably as a progressive society we've failed the most to do, which is, to my mind, at the root of some of the responses that we've got and the challenges to institutional structures that we've got right now. So be still, listen, notice, and then with any luck, something will come to you which you will see does actually matter.
So another one of the things that you talk about along these lines is changemakers.
Yeah.
And the ability to be able to drive and institute change, particularly within the workplace. And I'm convinced that of that merry-go-round example, there was somebody somewhere that obviously thought that was a great idea and maybe even views him or herself as a change maker. What do you view is a change maker, and sort of what are some of those key components to change makers, and how do we view ourselves as change makers within large organizations?
So I think there's a couple of other moves you've got to make. There's from the distraction mindset to the attention mindset, but then there's also moving from exactly as you say the mindset of the change maker, which is I've got the solution, and guess what? You guys are going to implement it, and if you don't, you're dinosaurs. To let go of that dogma and listen to the very people who are opposing you, and they're opposing your idea, and find out what's really going on. What do they know that I should also know? And actually, the real change makers find two particular people that they listen to very early on. The first is the very biggest power blocker that they've got. Someone who actually represents the old model of doing things and who's got the institutional clout to block what you're doing, or at best make what you're doing really minor and fringe and performative, okay? If you can't understand where they're coming from and reframe it so that they can see an upside for them and a synergy for them, it's never going to happen. Then the second is to find the person who's sitting with their arms crossed, looking at you like you haven't quite got it. Yeah, but you haven't quite got it. And to create the culture of psychological safety where that person who's maybe got more passion on a particular angle of this than you've got, or more insight on a particular angle, and thinks that you're just walking in with some sort of amateur spirit, but they've actually tried it and they've already learned these lessons and they've seen that it doesn't work for this reason. Find those people who are the silent rebels who could be your biggest allies and who could really help you accelerate. So the change makers, I think, do this humbling of their own, this is my show, the sort of numero uno mindset, and they find the biggest obstacle and then they let themselves take a back seat as part of a team. And I think there is no change maker. There is no transformative leader. There is only a transformative team. So their final skill is to create this vision of an outcome that a group of other people share, and then just be the catalyst that enables that to happen.
So you talk about the silent rebel, and then there are a couple others. What about the workhorse?
Yeah, so in this study we've been doing with Oxford, it turns out, and it'd be interesting to see sort of in this group how you feel you are, that in response to all these changes, there's kind of 4 attitudes we can take. And there's two axes that these evolve on. The first is transformative intent, which is, what do you want to do with the world? Are you quite happy taking a back seat and sort of just, clocking in, and you have no real transformative intent? Or do you want to do stuff? Do you want to have some impacts? And then the second is, how safe are you? Do you have real psychological safety and voice, and you can stand up? Or do you fold like a pack of cards the moment you meet any resistance? And with those two axes, we find that there is a group that is the catalyst. They're really filled with transformative intent, and they got voice, and they drive change, and they inspire some others. And then there's another group who have run into barriers. They run into bosses who've told them, this is not on your terms of reference. That is not part of your KPIs. I want you to meet this year's numbers by doing what's on the budget for this year. And they're told, actually, pull back, block it. And what happens to these people is they become the silent rebel, where they know that there is a change that is not being driven. They know that the institution's failing, and it might be on gender, it might be on climate, whatever the topic is. They know that this is not the organization they want to be living in, that it's failing to achieve what it could. And the silent rebel, it sucks it up and maybe finds meaning outside of work. Then there's a third group, which is the workhorse, where the desire to change just gets extinguished, as well as there being no psychological safety. And they just suck it up. They punch the clock 40 hours a week for 20 years, and then they die, and that was life. And it was great. And Gallup, by the way, will tell you that the silent rebel and the workhorse is about 92% of the workforce. And then you have this third group that's actually the most problematic of all, which is the sustaining innovator, who's completely psychological safe, who's singing and dancing, standing on the roof of the car. But they're the ones who are actually, when it comes to our green hydrogen example, they're the ones who are putting on the green hydrogen conference. They're the ones who are not actually doing anything substantive. They're just doing the symbolic, sustaining activity, which looks good, which avoids any meaningful change. And it turns out those are the ones who are actually inhibiting real action. Those are the ones who are, if we're all on this collective bus that's potentially headed towards a cliff, they're the ones who are getting behind the driving seat, keeping the steering wheel facing exactly where it's facing, maybe polishing the hubcaps a little bit, putting on some nice music, spraying some air freshener, and indicating left, saying, yeah, everything's going to be okay. So these leadership types are all behavioral responses that you see within organizations based on individual psychology and organizational structures. And one of the big challenges for organizations is, how do you create the environment where the catalysts don't get silenced? And you don't need everybody to be a catalyst, you just need a few. But where they can come up with initiatives that will innovate and make some change, and where you can then harness the sustaining innovators to their very cool initiative. Because the sustaining innovators, they're vital. You can come up with a brilliant idea, but you probably don't know the product market fit. You probably don't know how to make it really sweet. And then the workhorses, once you've got that real product market fit, of course you need the workhorses to roll it out and do 10,000 of them. And then you need the silent rebels to look at it again a year later and say, yeah, but what about this next evolution? So can you create this organization whose culture and systems and incentives allow not just short-term, we got to cut some costs and we got to keep the numbers up to hit this year's targets, but that long-term vision of how you can harness this strength, this diversity, and innovate our way out of some of the problems we've got.
And I think that's great advice, and particularly for those of us that are in senior leadership that have been around a long time. And I put myself back in the position when I started, 26 years ago, and still have that mindset of wanting to be and aspiring to be a catalyst and make that change. And And what I found is those high-performing teams, and again, I love the formula of agency, autonomy, connectedness to help create those high-performing teams and help facilitate and grow catalysts, right? But not everybody wants to be a catalyst, but you need all those members of the team to be high-performing. But if we take it from that executive level whether he or she is making really big changes to somebody who's just starting their career, the way I think about it is like you can drive and create change just in the everyday processes that you're going through. Like none of us are going to be able to stop the wars that are going on. We may struggle with climate change, with economic issues, whatever our particular issues are. But the way I try to harness that is what are the problems and things that I can control within my work life? And how do I try to create those high-performing teams, solve those issues, and ensure that everybody has a positive experience?
100%. So what all the data shows is that the biggest enemy of transformation, of people in organizations doing stuff, and in communities, is learned helplessness, is a lack of belief in efficacy, that it's actually going to make a difference. And it turns out that, of course, if you're doing stuff on your own, you're not going to have efficacy. You can't do stuff. None of us can do any of this stuff on our own. But if you can manage to find that collaboration, then you do see this extraordinary upswing in the capability. And the collective agency then becomes this kind of bedrock for something different, which I think is quite important for society. You know, we're at this crazy moment where we don't know what to feel with what's going on out there. And I myself veer, and I don't know if others do, between moments of delusional optimism, everything will be fine, we've got the technology, the world goes through these crazy points of inflection, to catastrophism. This is so dark, and it's beyond me to do anything about it. And I think neither of those are perspectives that are valuable perspectives to take. And I think there is a perspective which is to try to find reasons for constructive hope, which there is hope grounded in the fact that there are problems that are out there, but there are technologies and there are institutions and there are groups and there are individuals inspiring those groups who can collectively make things happen. And I think what we can each do, even if it is very small and local and appears to be very distant from these big problems, if it builds that muscle of constructive hope, then I think it's an important contribution.
It's a great way to kind of wrap things up from where we started with the news cycles. Maybe just the last question for you is, I think many of us struggle with burnout in our work lives particularly. Maybe like some quick advice that you have for listeners, for the audience of, you've been doing this a long time, I've been doing this a long time. What advice do you have to manage burnout?
So I think burnout is your friend. Burnout is telling you that what you're doing at some level is bullshit. That's my theory. And that you've got to be smarter. You've got to figure out the thing that is meaningful for you and let go of some of the other stuff. And then go and find the people you need, including the obstacles, to try to do something that moves the needle on it. And you may fail. You may get, punched in the mouth, but you probably won't if you're going at it with some passion, with some humility. So burnout, listen to it. If you're feeling it, don't go and do and take on the additional project or the additional assignment that means nothing to you and what matters. Focus on the thing that actually really counts.
And I think you've helped give us a recipe for how do we effectuate that change, how do we identify that, and ultimately avoid burnout. Leo, I've really enjoyed having you on the Cross-Border Tax Talks podcast. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
So thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Cross-Border Tax Talks. Thank you, Leo Johnson, lecturer at Oxford University's Smith School of Enterprise and Environment. I'm Doug McHoney, PwC's International Tax Services Global Leader. Stay tuned for another exciting edition of the Cross Border Tax Talks podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by PwC, all rights reserved. PwC refers to the U.S. member firm or one of its subsidiaries or affiliates and may sometimes refer to the PwC network. Each member firm is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.